This is the art class online, and this is the second part of the talk on painting the modern city, painting the modern city of London. Claude Monet was probably the first artist to paint on series in any substantial degree. And in these paintings that he made of Waterloo Bridge, you can see how he is exploring effects of light and colour that are created by a big industrial city like London. So, Cézanne said of Monet, he's only an eye, but God, what an eye. And Monet's discrimination of nuances of colour and light is really beyond compare, to be honest. If you look at these paintings of Waterloo Bridge, the discrimination of really the minutest nuances of colour, and it's all to do with how the sensations, the perceptions that he was experiencing in front of these views. And his common practice was to have 2 or 3 canvases by his side at a single sitting, so that as light changed, he would work on canvases to reflect that change of light, and they would have been built up over probably a number of sittings, and indeed some of them were finished in the studio. So I'm going to move on now to his paintings he made of Westminster Bridge and the Houses of Parliament. And he again worked in these in complete series. Here is, because he's looking towards the west, this is the setting sun, and everything is broken down into brushstrokes of colour. It's interesting, he's using complementaries of orange and blue, but they're working, incredibly well against one another. No detail. It's all about colour and light. So, and the particular lighting and atmospheric and weather conditions at the time. Here's another one in the series. Again, the sun setting to the west and throwing into silhouette the Houses of Parliament. So in this case, he's playing off because of the smogs in London at the time. You'd get these incredible sunsets to the west, and I think one of the reasons Monet chose to paint London, he returned. He didn't have to come back to London, after the Franco-Prussian War, but he chose voluntarily to come back to London because of the atmospheres, because of the atmosphere in the city caused by these smogs, and it lent itself to these wonderful kind of hazy, misty, indistinct scenes. I think some poet called London this ethereal city, and Monet captures this. And I was talking earlier about Turner painting. If you recall, we looked at the burning of the Houses of Parliament way back. I mean, you can see very similar things happening in 1834 with Turner. You know, the same building, the House of Parliament, on fire, and the treatment of how you represent a city in terms of painterly qualities like colour and light, and how that particular method of painting in 1834, which was way ahead of its time, finds its expression again in 1902, you know, 70 years later. You know, Monet claims that he didn't really pay much attention to Turner, but I can't imagine that Monet could have made paintings without at least the knowledge of what Turner did. And just looking again at the composition, it's quite, what Monet is doing is very similar to what Whistler is doing here. You know, the space in the paintings become, and this is a characteristic of modern painting, the space becomes quite shallow, and the space is tilted up to the picture plane. And what Whistler was doing in the 1870s and 1880s, Monet is now doing in the early 1900s. You know, the composition of this, the reflection of, is it St. George's Tower, reflected, making this strong vertical balanced out against the horizontal of the buildings. Monet is flattening space and tipping space up towards us and using colour and atmosphere, atmospheric perspective to create the space in the painting. And Monet would take this to the nth degree in the series of La Nymphia, the water lily paintings, where there is no horizon in the water lily paintings. It's just this complete edge-to-edge space of immersion in the surface of Monet's lake at Giverny, and you're lost in this sort of you know, completely sort of all-encompassing space where there's no up, there's no down, there's no left, there's no right. And in the water lily paintings, Monet really does harbinger, you know, post-war modern American painting, abstract expressionism. That's how far Monet travelled from early Impressionism to the harbingers of American abstract expressionism. And the abstract expressionists were looking at Monet, his late paintings, and drew inspiration from them. So London by 1900 is the world's biggest city, and is attracting attention as a place to go and paint. So by early 1900s, you have the next generation of French avant-garde painters, Matisse and Derain. And Derain had already been down in the south of France in Collioure with Matisse, where they made their great painting discoveries of 1905. But upon his return that winter to Paris, Derain spoke with his dealer, I think it was Ambrose Voila. I think it was Ambrose Voila. And Voila said, just go to London, and you know, Voila would have been aware of what Monet had been doing in London, and he just advised young Derain to go over to London and make almost like a sort of a kind of a reprise of what Monet was doing in London. So Derain, Andre Derain, the great Fauvist, French Fauvist painter, pitches up in London in 1906 and again starts painting the river, the Pool of London, but in such a different way. I mean, it's no longer to do it's no longer to do with atmosphere per se, but it's to do with color and just the sheer emotion of color and how that's conveyed in Derain's paintings, in you know, with it using the vehicle of the city of London, this urban, you know, cosmopolitan metropolis. And so you see here, you know, the loading of a ship or unloading of a ship. But he's not, you know, he's not describing the scene. The colours are primarily acting upon our senses, upon our emotions. It's not perceptual, you know. That's a perceptual use of colour. It's the phenomenology of colour. It's how our sensations are optically telling us about this wonderful sky behind the Houses of Parliament. But in Derain, Andre Derain's case, in the case of Fauvism, is what these colours are telling our emotions. And this is a totally different way of utilising colour. It's colour not just as perceptual vehicle, but colour as an emotional vehicle. And this one by Derain, again, the Pool of London. And that, you know, it's the quantity of colour, the quantity of green against the quantity of yellow. And this looks like it's like a dawn shot because he's looking east, down river. I think if I've got that right, or it's difficult to tell. It actually might be looking west because that might well be St. Catherine's Dock, and that might well be the Tower of London and that big building there. So it might be a sunset shot, sunset view as opposed to a sunrise view. But the point is, colour, you know, cool colours, the cool blue silhouettes set off against oranges. He's playing off complementaries, reds against greens, blues against oranges, and then he's extending the greens to the yellows. So there's a logic to how he's organising the space and the colour in the painting. So if you like, the painting of London was for a period of about 35 or 40 years, very much dominated by avant-garde, progressive French painting. But London had its own avant-garde painters, and we're going to look at some of London's homegrown painters now. And the first one we're going to look at is Walter Richard Sickert. Sickert, I think, was a friend of Degas, the Impressionist painter Edgar Degas. I think he'd met him and I think he struck up, to a certain extent, a friendship with Degas in Paris. And Sickert's concern was to paint not just the modern city, but the life of working people in the modern city. And one of his great themes was the London Variety Theatre, the music halls attended by the working classes. And he was mesmerized by the theatre. I mean, his first great love, he wanted to be an actor, Sickert, and his first great love was the theatre. And you can see him here literally seduced by limelight, the effect of artificial light on the faces of the audience. And his compositions, I think he borrowed a lot from Degas, because Degas was creating these very unconventional compositions for the time, when Degas was painting the theatre in Paris, the Palais Garnier, the Paris Opera. Degas would choose some very unusual viewpoints to frame his compositions. And this is what Sickert is doing. So you can see the cross-fertilization that's happening between Paris and London here in the representation of the city. Okay, Degas was an aristocrat, and he not only painted society Paris, but he also painted the poor, the poor working class people of Paris, including the dancers in the Palais Garnier, who were known as I think ballet rats. These sort of teenage girls who were the dancers. And Sickert chose, in essence, to paint the working classes of London. And this is wonderful in the sense that you see he's using a very dark ground to create the painting, and then he's overlaying these sort of khaki sandy tones, and then the dark umbers, and then just this great kind of contrast of the illuminated faces, painted very simply, but essentially in a kind of impressionist style, but not so fragmented, as the major impressionists in France. And Sickert's paintings are much darker. I mean, he painted lots of interior scenes, and with Sickert, it's not so much to do with colour. Sickert was a tonal painter. We're looking at tonal painting here, and he uses colour in a tonal way. And he was part of a group called the Camden Town Group. He himself lived in Camden Town, and another member of that group was the painter Harold Gilman. And we're moving on a bit now into really the outbreak of the First World War. And here Gilman, you can see, is painting basically a working class dining room. There used to be one up the top of Farringdon years ago called Stone's Chop House, and it was just like this, with the wooden banquettes, just benches basically, and it's a wonderful kind of microcosm of a slice of life in working class London during the First World War. But again, very aware of modern developments in painting. So he's thinking compositionally of like this, the back of this partition is the foreground. And then it's almost like we are allowed into viewing this kind of almost like a secret space. He's almost like an observer looking into that world, the world of working class lunch and dining rooms. And there's a sort of wonderful anonymity of men in their caps. But he's aware of colour. He's playing off the warm kind of brick tones here against the greens, the decorative greens of the wallpaper. And you have to remember, by 1916, he was probably aware of French avant-garde painters working in Paris, people like Edouard Vuillard, Vuillard, and Pierre Bonnard, Bonnard, who were using really quite sort of decorative passages of painting within the composition. And he had also been aware of the writings of the English art critic and painter Roger Fry. And here we have another. I regret I mislaid the name of this painter, but it's another member of the Camden Town group. Again, painting working class life in London, in this case, the cinema. I mean, the early cinema as well. So again, it's tonal painting, but a very interesting composition of like this rhythm there, the figure, the chair, the figure, the chair, and then the rhythm of this kind of um, you know, kind of auditorium light painted in tones of reds and really deep maroon umbers and just the beautiful silvery light of the uh, projection machine throwing up images on the silver screen, which was it became, if you like, the early cinema was the if you like the opium of the masses. It was their it was the the wonderful magic magic screen that brought to life brought to life all life. All life was present, and if you've ever seen early cinema, there are just amazing images, these ephemeral silver images printed on silver nitrate. So there's a sort of almost an element of that in this painting. We've looked so far at professional painters, but London had its fair share of amateur painters who were so-called amateur painters, but by the quality of their work, qualified to become professional painters under in anyone's book. This is the artist Cecil Osborne, who was one of the members of the East London group, and we've moved into the 1930s now, after the First World War. And the East London group was a group of working class amateur artists in the East End of London who came under the tutelage of a professional artist whose name I think was Cooper. And Cooper himself was a friend of Sickert. So there are these kind of lineages that go through the painting of London. And you see here again taking an unusual viewpoint, looking down on Farringdon Road early on Sunday morning. And again, it's like it's the artist as observer onto a different space. And in this case, I mean, it's not a million miles away from what Edward Hopper is doing in New York City. The detached observer looking down. I mean, the fact that he's got like the window pane, the curtain, I would imagine a bit of the building, the architrave of the building. It's like all these devices are separating us from the scene, much in the way that Gilman uses this device to separate us, the viewer, from the scene. In other words, we're looking into something, and Cecil Osborne here is framing it. He's looking into something, and again, very beautifully composed, very beautifully constructed in terms of light and tonal values, and a real document of the time. I mean, there's a certain sort of, benighted quality about the way this would be, if I'm correct. It would be looking on the west side of, looking down Farringdon on the west side, because the light is coming from the east, and there's a sort of, it's almost like a benediction on these tenement buildings down the Farringdon Road, with the long early morning shadows of light being cast, and when you're painting urban architecture, The representations of shadows are a wonderful thing light and shade. Long cast shadows are very poetic and evocative um, of a city. And now we move into how London was portrayed in the Second World War and a city under attack. And in this painting by David Bomberg, sorry, I've left off the G on his name. It's Bomberg, Bomberg. We see, I mean, the view of St. Paul's, but all around is blitzed are the shells of buildings. But he presents London not as a defeated city, but a city epitomized by St. Paul's, rising like a phoenix from the ashes. In other words, London is survived. It came through it, and he presents, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, bathed in the light, bathed in the light of a new dawn. And Bomberg's favorite phrase was the spirit in the mass. And what that means, I think, is that in the portrayal of any subject, a human being, a building, a landscape, the actual subject contains an animism. It's a life force within the subject, whether it's a blitzed city, whether it's a landscape in Spain, which he painted, whether it's a person. It's like he saw the task of the artist as basically freeing the spirit in the mass. And you can see here how he's doing it with this sort of use of color, and he's obviously aware of Fauvism. He's he's very aware of modern movements in painting, but he's he's simplifying. He's simplifying he's pushing out extraneous detail, and we're just concentrated again, like Fauvism, on the emotion that he feels in front of this scene. Another artist who painted with his emotions post-war, very great painter, doesn't get enough recognition now, he should get more, is John Minton. And he went down to Wapping after the war and painted the warehouses, but in a totally different way than Bomberg. With Minton, it's all about, I mean, it's all essentially Minton's big god was Picasso and Cubism and Braque. And you see how at this time Minton is aware of post-war French painting. His paintings before the war and during the war were really quite neo-romantic. And there's a neo-romantic element to this in terms of like the way he sort of created these shadows on the faces here and the general tonalities. There's a certain sort of neo-romantic strain, but in terms of the form of the painting is coming directly from people like Picasso, Braque, the Cubists, in his treatment of space. I mean, he's tilting space up towards us. He's looking at boats in different directions all at the same time. So you're getting sort of different superimposed views of the barge all at one time. And it's just a very kind of, there's a certain sort of melancholy about it, but there's a sort of mystery about Minton's painting. he imbues his paintings of London with a great sense of mystery, and in the pre-war paint of nostalgia. And these are ways of looking at a city. Now, Bomberg had many students, David Bomberg, and one of his students was the German emigre Frank Auerbach, who's just done a wonderful interview on for the BBC. And Auerbach records the area around where his studio is, around Mornington Crescent, Camden Town. And you can see in this painting how, again, he's referring, like Bomberg, to how colour is used, colour and gesture, and the sheer physical presence of paint, and how that can describe a city. He's an expressionist painter, Frank Auerbach, and he captures again his response, and how he expresses that response in paint, in materiality, and in texture, in light and colour. The artist I want to end on deals with London in a very much more poetic, gentler way, but again preserving this sense of colour. Adrian Berg, and he's made many paintings of Regent's Park, in this case Gloucester Gate, and they become really quite abstract in their sense of the placement of broken colour, and he's tilting trees in different directions. But we get a sense of light and colour, and the sheer joyousness of being in Regent's Park in the autumn. I think we've looked at many different ways in which London can be painted, and I hope some of these responses might suggest ways in which the painters watching this video might indeed respond to London. Thank you very much for watching, and please tune into other videos by the Art Class Online. Thank you.